magic. The very word can feel like a curse to many good Christians. Add other terms like witch or wizard, and you will get an even more heated cauldron of controversy. We are no strangers to that at Lorehaven, and now our longtime friend Marian A. Jacobs has created the definitive book treatment of this topic. This week on Magic and Miracles apparates into the world, and Marian herself flies into our studio to compare fictional magic with occult dangers.
Speculative fiction, like no other genre, reflects the creativity of God.
If you look at the scriptures, you're going to have to see that God uses imagination more than rational discourse.
We are supposed to be image bearers for a vastly creative God.
Reading fantastical fiction opened a portal in my imagination for a place other than just a materialistic world.
I experienced the gospel story with the mind of someone who loved adventure and loved the idea of light conquering darkness.
We're wired for stories that reflect how we see the world in ways that are true.
The story is either pointing to Christ or it's pointing to our need for Christ.
Behold, Fantastical Truth, the re-enchanting podcast from Lorehaven.com, where we explore fantastical stories for God's glory. I am Stephen Burnett. I co-host this podcast. I am a C-pop demon hunter, and I'm the author of a science fiction novel launched a few months ago from Enclave Publishing called Above the Circle of Earth.
And I'm Zackary Russell, and I once got turned into a newt, but I got better. And this is episode 269. How can fantasy fans dispel occult darkness? And we're going to be joined in a little bit by author Marian A. Jacobs.
Longtime Lorehaven readers will know Marian as being at the very beginning when we were a print magazine and everything, but I've known her for some time before that. She's written a lot of really great stuff at Lorehaven specifically. All those links will be in the show notes for you. But now we have On Magic and Miracles, which I have in the studio, which you cannot see because we are not a video podcast. Here it is. It's wonderful. I'm going to have Marian sign this fine paperback copy at the Realm Makers Expo next month. I am looking forward to seeing the reception to this book, and particularly the conversations that this is going to start for Christian fans who want to work through some of those warnings we used to hear about fictional magic and not just answer them with feelings or with logic or with other kinds of responses, but with biblical rationality. And that's what this book offers. And I look forward to asking Marian more about that in just a moment.
You know, Stephen, you just made me rethink something. I was planning to get this on Kindle because I like to get most of my nonfiction as ebooks because I tend to like to highlight things in the Kindle and then I can share it really easily on Goodreads or social media, whatever. But now I'm thinking, how in the world is Marian going to sign my Kindle copy? I don't think that's possible. So maybe I will have to get a physical copy. We'll see what happens. I'm also running out of bookshelf space, and my wife said no more bookshelves. So I'm kind of caught in a pickle here.
Well, perhaps one can apply a sticker to the back of the Kindle device. That may be a limited space for authors to sign, but perhaps that's a solution to that. Or you could just get a physical book and hide it somewhere, which is something that a lot of readers were doing with Harry Potter books back when their fundamentalist parents were trying to keep them from enjoying their time at Hogwarts. There's still some feelings that we might concede in a very quick concession stand here. I just want to recognize those, but this is not the Harry Potter episode, y'all. Harry Potter just started those conversations, which a lot of them were already going on before a certain boy wizard arrived on the scene. I remember even as a kid being warned about fictional magic, and we don't watch that because there's magic, or we don't read that because there's magic. And is it the same kind of magic that scripture forbids? Well, we've talked about that on this podcast, but we're going to talk about it again from different angles today.
Yeah, and if we're going to talk about Harry Potter, I insist on talking about the AI aspect now, because the Meta AI, I think it's called, or Llama, they have now successfully reproduced, I think it's like 40 or 50%, maybe it's more than that now, of Harry Potter just by prompting it, saying, hey, what happens when Harry does this or Hermione does that? And Llama is able to output most of Harry Potter now, which is bringing up a lot of interesting copyright things.
Speaking of demons.
But I really want to know, is Llama going to get magic powers from this? Are we dooming ourselves by teaching the AI how to use magic?
No, let's not do that. There's a fine book by that about that by Clint Hall, by the way. Anyway, at Lorehaven, we review books like that one and a recent review of a Beowulf retelling called Break the Beast. We just posted that last Friday. This Friday, we have upcoming a review of Lindsay Llewellyn's new sci-fi novel set in futuristic Texas called The Crier Stone. You can get all those at lorehaven.com and subscribe free to our now rebooted email system, which is working out really well. We will send you all those updates that you so desire, as well as our invitation to join the Lorehaven Guild, our Castle in the Cloud on Discord. Hey, speaking of the Crier Stone, it's our top sponsor from Enclave Publishing. That's the new novel by Lindsay Llewellyn, a sequel to her previous book, The Chaos Grid. Brave the Plex, unleash the stone, embrace your destiny. I can try to read that without the Darth Vader voice, but I can't. It's not written that way. Freshly freed from an earth-dwelling monster, Juniper Conway is stuck with a promise she never intended to make. But if rescuing Plex City from a deadly nanodrug is what she vowed, it's what she'll do. Miles of wasteland stretch between Juniper and the domed city. In the Texas outer grid, following a tribe of whalers seems to be her best bet at surviving the chaotic storms. But when the nomadic tribes prove just as dangerous as the grid itself, Juniper realizes her streak of bad luck is far from over. Only her shipping crew friends can help her through the waste and into the Plex. When the Crier Stone guiding her mission only shows her fragmented steps, Juniper will need more than the stone around her neck and a half-hearted promise to make it out alive. Enclave Escape presents The Crier Stone by Lindsay Llewellyn, the exciting new sequel to The Chaos Grid. It is available next week, Tuesday, July the 8th, wherever fantastic books are sold. Ask for it at your favorite bookseller or your local library, or order it online at Amazon, or 20% off hardcover, enclavepublishingstore.com. It's also available as an audiobook from Oasis Audio. We have a lot of gates into this studio, and one of them is designed specifically for flying creatures. I'm going to go over here, push the button. We need to open that and open it just a bit wider. Marian A. Jacobs has flown in on the back of Falkor, the luck dragon from an 80s movie you may have heard of. As I mentioned at the top of the show, she's been around here for quite some time, and now she's launching off into this new adventure with her new nonfiction book about fantasy called On Magic and Miracles. Marian, we've been looking forward to this for a long time. It's thrilling to have you back.
Yeah, thanks for having me back. I'm so glad to be here.
Well, On Magic and Miracles is available today, July the 1st, although I got my hands on a whole box full of copies, and I mentioned that when I was at the Realm Makers bookstore. So it feels like it's already released, but now it is officially released. You can get it at Amazon and all the usual suspects. This comes out from B&H Publishing. So how's it been so far, just getting your first published book, which ends up being nonfiction, out into the world?
It's been so surreal. Just the excitement, people who have been, talking about it online, reviewing Bookstagrammers, and getting to go walk into Barnes and Noble and seeing it on the shelf actually early was just crazy, and getting to sign it. And it's been wild.
Well, you are also coming to the Realm Makers Expo, which is next month, July 18th through 20th at the DeVos Place Convention Center in Grand Rapids. This is Realm Makers, our friends who started a writers conference led by Christian fantasy creators. It's still going on, but it's also expanding into that more fan-centric event. So I've been going to Realm Makers for a while just as a vendor talking about Lorehaven, and then catching some of the writing stuff on the side through other conversations. But Marian, you're going to be there. What are your hopes for what people are going to think about On Magic and Miracles once they see it at the conference?
I have had several people tell me that they plan to get their copies there at the conference and to have me sign them. I really have no idea what to expect as far as how many people will be interested, but I am hoping to have a lot of great conversations.
Yeah, we've had lots of those conversations before. Do you remember that time? This was early on. It was in Waco, Texas, I think. You guys were still living around here, and we teamed up and we went to an event there. And there was this one guy at the end who really, really had to be in his bonnet about the fictional magic issue. And then you keep talking to him, and it turns out there's a lot of family drama and other stuff happening there. So I think that a lot of this topic is tied up with people's backstory, even though they come to some firm beliefs about fictional magic and its harm. But he really, he wasn't aggressive. He was just really intense, and kind of stayed like till the end after I'd packed everything up, and he really wanted to talk, or maybe he just needed someone to listen.
Yes, you had a lot more patience than I would have had for that man. But yeah, I think it is personal. Like a really good friend of mine at church grew up like this, not necessarily fundamentalist in every way that we would assume, but just being taught if you have Harry Potter in your home, or if you have anything evil in your home at all, it's going to open up a portal. You're going to invite demonic oppression, you know? So she's just like, oh my gosh, this is scary. I don't know what to think about this. So
Well, I remember the Teach Them Diligently conference that Stephen and I recorded live from a couple years ago on the podcast, where there was an author there that had signs out front that said fantasy with no magic. And I thought that was so interesting. And
it is a thing.
Yeah, it was kind of more like medieval fantasy type stuff. It was just interesting to see that right away. Oh, okay, so you're this type of fantasy, not this other type of fantasy. But I thought about that sign, and I'm like, it was like a printed out sign on like 8.5 by 11 paper, you know, from a home printer. So it wasn't like his like tagline or something on like an author poster. And I thought, okay, he's probably printed that out because he's had a lot of parents ask him, does this fantasy have magic in it? And he's like, no, that's just not what I write. And I have no idea why he writes that type of fantasy versus another type. It's really not even about him as an author. It's about him getting that question over and over again, which, you know, not an unusual question at a homeschool conference. I didn't grow up homeschool. We do homeschool kind of. Like, we're kind of a blended homeschooling, public schooling family. So we have kind of seen this question around homeschool groups, but I also live in a very, I don't know, crunchy kind of city where like that, these books are just normal. There's everywhere. So yes, we're in the South, but we're in this kind of weird part of the South. But I know that there's a segment that's like, it's just very separated from like mainstream culture in terms of literature. It sounds like your book is really aimed at kind of answering the questions that community has. Would that be correct?
yes, it's aimed at like, what do we do for, you know, homeschoolers who are wondering what to do for their kids. But I think I also wanted to help just writers and adult readers who are already reading fantasy to be able to be a little bit more discerning about the stuff that they're already reading or that they're already writing. Because I think you kind of go into it knowing, I know that I'm okay with this already, but you don't necessarily know why and or like how to navigate it with wisdom. And so yeah, I tried to kind of talk to many different groups of people while writing this and trying to hit lots of different, like just get a lot of nuance into it. It's probably why it ended up being so long.
Well, so long. It's only about 300 pages with the endnotes, and it is extremely readable. It is really, really well done. Fantastic layout. It's just equal parts personal and professional. There's theology in here, but it is practical. It is certainly of use, not just to some parents out there who automatically and wrongly assume that fantasy is kids stuff. It is certainly of benefit to the Christian fan, the Christian reader, who, like you said, already kind of accepts fantasy, but there may be some shallow foundations for that, simply because, as I mentioned before, there are a lot of Christian readers who grew up in that sort of suspicious household where the demons are out there in the world, or it's just bad ideas. And so we want to be extremely cautious and discerning, and that's good, especially for younger kids. But if you don't know when to take those training wheels off or why to take them off, and the purpose of where you're even riding a bike in the first place, and the fact that God has given us imagination for his glory, then you might rebel as a homeschool kid or a Christian kid or some kind of kid, and then kind of drift into enjoying fantasy mainly because it feels good. It's good for what ails you. It seems to scratch that itch for a community or another world to escape to. And it might be the right thing, but for the wrong reason. Here we get the right reasons. And yet, I really appreciate, and I know a lot of readers are going to appreciate, that there's a fair chunk of this book right up front that is dealing earnestly and seriously with the actual risks that some Christians were trying to guard against with some of their anti-magic rules. And the fact that those risks are still happening today, and that we should not, as Christians, overcorrect for this kind of mystical, unbiblical view of spiritual warfare with something very like materialism. So that's chapter 1. What in the actual pagan occult? This is a big topic at Lorehaven. I've been interested in this for a while, even going to the Deuteronomy 18 text. I just recently brought that up in a 2-part course at a writer's conference, also talking about fictional magic. So I got to talk about this book a lot. But what does God in the Bible really forbid and why? Well, you can go to a previous episode about Deuteronomy 18. But to sum up, Christians may miss what is actually in the scripture by the confusion, often just because of the label, of actual evil magic, which is in pursuit of idolatry and can lead you to actual demons, which still exist. But we confuse that with fictional magic, which generally does not exist. It is made up, hence fictional. But in response to that confusion, I know that there are other Christians who may dismiss the threat of occult magic, either because they're very academic sorts and they think in terms of ideas and policies and beliefs. And so they know that demons exist. They just don't really think that a demon could actually get someone out there. And it could be extremely complex what they're into. Or there may be other Christians who effectively just say, it's not real. Magic isn't real. No magic is real. In fact, J.K. Rowling actually says that herself,
Right.
which is even noted in our previous episode. It's kind of like going out of the frying pan into the fire. It almost might be better for you to acknowledge supernatural activity in the world rather than say, oh, it's not real. We're just a materialistic world. Nobody dies. There's nobody lives. There's forever. There's no heaven. Occult practices are real, however. And as you note in these chapters at the first part of the book, may even have limited effect on drawing demons to you. This does happen. And former occult followers, as you note, many of them now, because we're in social media times, testify about this. And the fact that, yeah, the stuff I was into seems to have worked for a while. Everything seemed to be getting better. The demons are able to pull off some hoaxes, it seems, and maybe even seem to make some promises come true. But it will eventually lead to ruin. It will definitely lead to ruin eventually. And the people who are into this stuff, as you note, they discovered that this was idolatry and it was born from suffering, but it was also my choice and it led to more suffering. And what's wonderful, and it's not all dark here, the first part of the book, is all the testimonies that you read and a few that you got personally led these people to renounce the works of the devil and embrace Jesus Christ. They're anecdotes, but the plural of anecdotes is data. And what was the thing that you found out that wasn't quite at fault in these people's stories that some Christians might think was at fault?
When I was first telling people that I was doing that research and I watched 200 testimonies and wrote down what led them into the occult. And when I first started doing that research and told people about it, they're like, oh, I know why. It's because of all of that fantasy. It's the Disney, it's the Harry Potter, it's just so big right now. It's just consuming people. That's why, the occult is growing the way that it is. And I had people just like straight up, that is the reason. And I was like, actually, that's just not what I'm finding. Most people, the reason was because they had trauma or mental health problems and they were looking for something to fix their problems. There were a few people, 11 out of 200, that had been tempted by fantasy magic, and that was mentioned as part of their journey. It was not their whole journey. And the 2 people I talked to personally said that they would have found the occult or the New Age even without fantasy. It just happened to be part of that, like their stepping stones to getting to the occult. But yeah, it was a very small minority. And even people who were specifically mentioned Harry Potter, it was only maybe 2 or 3 people out of 200. So it's a pretty small minority. And all of those people except one, all of the 11 except one had a history of trauma. I keep like reiterating this to anyone I talk to. It's again and again, if you have a kid who is tempted by fictional magic, you probably need to figure out what's going on with that kid and if something else is a problem.
Yeah, it's a symptom.
Yeah, I can definitely say that was the case in my own life, because in some ways they're a little bit intermingled, but I was introduced to the occult before I really got into fantasy. So when I was about 12 years old, a friend of mine showed me how to see and evaluate someone's aura, or so I thought, or so he thought.
It's so often word of mouth, isn't it?
Right. Just friend to friend. And with that, I was very open to it, though, because of a lot of trauma I went through as a child. I mean, that was right about the time that there was a restraining order put on my father. And that was really the last time I saw him and last time I wanted to see him, because of some very dangerous things I grew up with. I grew up just with all of this fear around me, feeling powerless. I also really embraced a lot of anger, unforgiveness, revenge fantasies, those kind of things because of what I endured. And so the occult very much had a very easy time drawing me in. I got into fantasy after the fact, but they sort of self-reinforced a little bit because it's like, oh, okay, this is what it could look like if magic was real, and maybe it is real. Maybe all this new age stuff is possible or whatever. It really took me about 6 or 7 years to really find my way out of it. And thankfully, I became a believer during that time. And that's what really brought me out of it. But I always think of that passage in Acts 19, where it's the church in Ephesus, or they're in Ephesus, and there's this sort of failed exorcism that gets everyone's attention. And then it says that the word of this failed exorcism, that like real demonic activity got around, and there were people that repented of their witchcraft and magic and burned their magic scrolls publicly. And so I think that some of those people were Christian, some may not have been, but they realized that, like, wow, okay, this occult power is really dark and really dangerous and really bad for you. And that's what got it was just the reality of the spiritual world. Not how the spiritual world presents itself as this sort of self-empowerment, but this real story of where that collided with humans is what caused people to repent. It wasn't like, stop reading those things or whatever. Stop it. Again, it was like they were dealing with real magic. It wasn't like they burned their fantasy
real
books.
monster.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, they weren't burning Harry Potter books.
Yeah.
They were burning spell books.
Yeah, but sometimes the occult interest that usually comes first, like you said, in whatever the math is, 180 times out of 200, most of the time it is a pre-existing interest in the occult that then leads to fantasy. And so sometimes that can be an indicator. Like when someone picks up a fantasy book, it could be an indicator of like, I wonder what else is going on in their life that caused them to be interested in this genre. And that can be a good like diagnostic tool. But there may be nothing like that. It may just be, I just like fantasy.
Right. Yeah.
If I were the devil, I would play both sides. I would arrange one way or another, and people can debate how this happened, for systemic family breakup and other generators of trauma across the generations, across the nations, of people of all different religions and people groups, and then play off the fear of that trauma and lead people into the occult, and then play off the fear of the occult and lead Christians into legalism, and play off the fear of that. He's constantly playing one off of another because the devil thrives on that kind of conflict. It's how he got to be the devil. It's dangerous to imagine what exactly is going on inside that horned skull of his, but we've got a little sin nature left in us. We can at least sort of theorize a bit. And so knowing exactly what he's up to counts, Marian, as the biblical commands to have nothing to do with the unfruitful works of darkness, but rather expose them. Now, you exposed yourself to 200 videos and then some other testimonies. And then unfortunately, now people figure out you're into that sort of thing. So they're going to bring you more. And so I apologize for sharing with you that video clip of a demon possessed person, it would seem, or mentally disturbed person on the street who is standing on her hands and then screaming at the young, handsome street preacher who was just trying to give out some bottled water, screaming at him to get the blankety blank out of her city, and this is her territory. And like, it sounds like Frank Peretti demon dialogue there. I will try to send you a nice cat video next time, Marian. But how did
I do love cat videos, so
cat videos, but not demon oppressed cats. So
well, they're all demon possessed.
How are you? I know it sounds a little pastoral.
I'm a dog
here,
person. Sorry.
How are you spiritually after that level of research?
So when I first started watching them, it was a lot heavier spiritually. I kind of got a little desensitized as I kept going. But in the beginning, I was reading books on the theology of magic, Michael Heiser, watching these videos, and I was overwhelmed, to say the least. And I had like a couple days where I remember just kind of sitting on my bed and just kind of crying and just listening to the same worship song over and over. It was Ancient of Days. I was kind of pondering just how big God is And even though like a lot of it, there was some darkness mixed in with that research. And it was really overwhelming and spiritually taxing at times. I think in the end, with everything like taken together, ended up being very grateful that I could understand the bigness of God and of all of his creation and of the visible and the invisible, and just allow myself to be overwhelmed by that and be overwhelmed by him. It was, I think, a life-changing experience. I was able to kind of sit at his feet in a new way, with like trying to reject more fully materialism, more than I had ever before, just because we're sort of born into it. We don't even realize that we are kind of living in that environment. Yeah, I think it ended up being hard, but also a beautiful thing.
Well, that sounds like something a good fictional wizard would say, is that it is in the darkness that the light can shine all the brighter. It's a biblical thought, though, when you rightly define darkness and rightly define light, and you are rightly defining it, of course, throughout this book. I'm glad you're okay. Hopefully don't have to do that again, but also I am glad then that God looked bigger and more wonderful after that, and that even Christian worship music, even like C-pop, like I mentioned, C-pop, good music, great stories can help us resist that kind of darkness and then maybe even turn into a kind of demon hunters. What's interesting, Marian, is that I see dual paths for people who are like, even many non-Christians, like including in the podcast spaces and some of these spaces, who are becoming more aware that evil is real. If evil, therefore devil. If devil, therefore God. If God, therefore Christ and saving gospel. And that's where they need to go, right? But if people end up thinking if evil, therefore devil, if devil, therefore I must follow the law, well, now you're just going to meet the devil eventually, and it's going to be quite a shock to you. So I don't want to see that happen, but some people do need to be led to the law so that they can be led to their final destination, Jesus Christ, and be saved from the wrath of God for their failure to keep all 100% of the law. And the gospel is in your story. And I hope that some of those folks will find this book and be thinking about these stories and will have their materialism broken, but then also not end up in this sort of vague supernaturalism where they're talking about Nephilim and focusing just on the demons. Like, demons are in the margins of the Bible. They are active. They're real. Satan is real. But the primary thrust of the Bible's plotline is Christ saving human beings from their sin and from the wiles of the devil. I don't see any reason not to affirm penal substitutionary atonement and Christus Victor and a whole bunch of those other little buzzwords. It's all fulfilled in the death and resurrection of Christ.
Yeah, I think we just need a good balance of those things. Because I think depending on your theological camp and your community, there's a way to underemphasize either of them. I tend to be more in a community where we definitely hammer on sin a lot and almost never talk about demons, almost never talk about spiritual warfare. And I think that could be very dangerous to never acknowledge that Satan is real and that spiritual warfare is real. And that can be really, really dangerous. But then, of course, you have other communities in which, they can become obsessive about demonology, Nephilim, the supernatural, and they lose sight of Christ in that. I think they lose sight of the gospel, and I think to be able to say that these things are both present, very present, especially in the New Testament, you have in a lot of the letters, Paul, Peter, they're not shying away from talking about either one of them. Neither of them are shying away from talking about the gospel right alongside talking about spiritual warfare. They're both there right up against each other. And so I think that we can do that. We don't have to say, well, it's not really about that, because I think it's about both. Even in the, when we talk about the gospel, when we talk about the resurrection, we should acknowledge Satan's part in it. It's big. It's a big deal. He was there. He was present. It says, that at the Last Supper, it says Satan entered into Judas. Yes, there is a man and there is his sin, but then there is Satan, and he is taking advantage of a sinful man. We're certainly not removing guilt, but we also are acknowledging the part that Satan is playing in this story.
Just to your point about getting too focused on one danger or another, I think you're right. we need to be aware of all dangers pretty equally, but more than that, it's about being focused on Christ. Because I brought up the church in Ephesus in Acts 19. And what I always think about is in Revelation 2, when Jesus is writing or speaking these letters to the church. And at that time in the church in Ephesus, he commends them for their good works, for their perseverance, that they don't tolerate wicked people, that they have tested false teaching. And again, this is a church that has seen demons up close and personal and repented of witchcraft. And so they're doing all the things. But then he says, I hold this against you. You've forsaken the love you had at first. And so I think it's totally possible, whatever danger you're running from, which is good, like don't embrace evil, guys, don't embrace darkness. It can be very easy to forget that this is supposed to be about love for Christ. If that's not what's turning the gears in your spiritual life, then it really can become a problem. It can lead to all kinds of other bad things, because that's the greatest commandment, is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength.
Yeah, and that's also, I talk about that extensively in the book too. The discernment questions I have, like the contextual clues surrounding fictional magic. Is it more occultic or more godly in nature? We have to ask these questions to determine the context. And I think love and self-sacrifice and humility, those are huge, huge parts of looking at the surrounding context of supernatural events.
I think that's a really great point. I want to get to that in the next chapter. So what is the moral melody of the story? Is it a celebration of pride and unchecked ambition and squashing the little guy and all of that stuff? In other words, demonic fake virtues, stuff that Satan is real keen on, but Jesus is not. The one who emptied himself temporarily and gave himself to serve as a ransom for many. There are fantasy stories, including those by non-Christians, that will celebrate the good virtues, even if there's no easy Jesus character in there like Aslan that makes some Christians comfortable with reading the book. And there are some Christian-made stories that seem to be okay, but may actually seem to be celebrating some of the wrong things. So it still calls for discernment. There's no easy cheat. You need friends, wise friends, to help train you to do this, which leads me to our second sponsor, moving up now, The Company, which is a group of kingdom writers and world changers. So this is for all y'all out there who may want to make something, a book maybe, like Marian has made, whether nonfiction or fiction. Isn't it time for a real adventure? The Company is now enrolling writing apprentices for this fall. The Writing Apprenticeship is a full-time, in-person college alternative for Christian writers who are serious about reaching big audiences with their work. Join The Company at their headquarters in Cambridge, Ohio, to start living your dream as a writer. Apprentices improve their writing skills, learn to leverage opportunities within the publishing industry, and develop real experience marketing books. The Company's apprenticeship also includes an in-depth spiritual development curriculum. You will learn and do so much, and you'll have a lot of fun doing it. If you dream of writing and publishing, this is the shortest path between you and your goals. Learn more and get started at this URL, writers.company. The Company also offers a variety of online courses and resources for Christian writers who are serious about leveling up and breaking boundaries with their work. Check out their website today at writers.company to begin your adventure. You can see more about that in the show notes as well for this episode 269. Chapter 2. This is going to be a favorite and may seem familiar to longtime Lorehaven readers and podcast listeners. Why do Christians need fictional magic? Yes, we say need, just like you say, Marian, in your chapter 7, why the church needs fantasy. I'm so glad you said that because it's going to turn some heads. Like, well, isn't this at best a kind of optional? Do we really need this? Well, this is the turning point of the book. We spent 6 chapters legitimately warning against the actual occult, but actually answering this with biblical wisdom and facts and logic about where the occult practices actually come from and why people get trapped into them. But chapter 7 marks a welcome turning point in the narrative. We've dispelled, but not dismissed, the real threat of the darkness. Now it's time to find the light. Now let's talk about what fantasy and fictional magic is actually for. And by the way, as you said, guys, this isn't just for the kids, okay? Cartoons are not always just for kids, but if you have a little trouble with that, at least remind yourself that no, fiction and fantasy are not just for the kids. Adults don't graduate and then stay in the same level of discernment. We are all kids in a sense. We are all learning to do this. We are all growing and leveling up. This wisdom about fictional magic is for all faithful and wise Christians, and maybe even some non-Christians out there who are discovering that the devil is real and you ought to do something about that. In fact, if you shun fantasy or treat this as some sort of flippant pursuit at best, I would say, Marian, I don't think this is in the book, but I'm curious about your thoughts on this in a moment. I would say that if you reject fantasy, you're going to fall into materialism gradually, or you are more likely to accept silly myths as factual. And this is just an anecdote that I've seen. I've seen a lot of people who would say, oh, I don't read fantasy. That's nonsense. That's ridiculous. And then you should see the books that are on their shelves. They are fantasy. They are mysticism. They're silly books about fake prophecies and fake predictions and conspiracy theories that are almost entirely fictional. You may want to fight that with fiction and fantasy that is properly classified. Marian, you mentioned there are 2 chapters here that focus on the literary considerations, like people actually need to think about what is fiction for, what are the expectations of fantasy novels, and discernment of stories. So a lot of great material here. Some shout outs to the pop culture parent as well. Appreciate that. We all here, we love rightful emphasis on biblical discernment for everyone, truth over traditions. And Marian, how do you start with that, applying that to fantasy as a grown-up, not just because we got to keep the kids out of the bad stuff?
Yeah. As a grown-up, how do I apply like that the church needs fantasy? Is that specifically what you're asking?
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Exactly.
Yeah. I feel like that's a huge question, but to start off with, I think it's part of our identity as we were given instructions in the cultural mandate, which is I like to think of as a pre-fall covenant. We see God as a creator. He has made us. He has given us this pre-fall covenant to be creative culture makers. All humans are creators in some way, in some fashion. It doesn't necessarily mean every single human is artistic, but we are all creators in some way. And so in order to do that properly, we have to have imagination. And it is just who we are. It is a part of being the Imago Dei. And so I just want to say like that, of course, that has a much, much broader application than just fantasy. It has an application for really anyone in any career path, for even for women, birthing children. I mean, it's a beautiful, miraculous thing. And so to be able to now apply that more specifically in ways that are biblical, right? Well, and in the Bible, we see a lot of fantasy. And some people would kind of be a little insulted, maybe offended that we are using fantasy to like categorize literary genres from in the Bible. But it is what we have are depictions, fantastical depictions, often sometimes just metaphorical depictions. Not even all of them are literal, right? In the prophets, in Revelation. And God is communicating to us through imagery. And it's fantastical imagery. He's communicating truth through these pictures, these fantastical pictures. And it can be very confusing to interpret those things, but he doesn't shy away from being weird and being strange and being hard to understand. God is pressing into that. And I think that it is showing us that this is a way to communicate truth. It's showing us the strangeness and otherness of God and his creation, not just of the material world, but of the immaterial world. And the more that we are able to understand all that God has created, not just the earth and what is in it, but what is seen and unseen, we can use fantastical depictions of our own, images of our own that we have created to be able to convey truth and biblical truth, and to be able to help other people who maybe aren't writers understand when they read, their mind is being formed to understand God, to understand the invisible realm, the spiritual realm, that angels and demons, that these things open the mind up to realities that we cannot see. and help us to get out of our materialistic little boxes that we have grown up in, that humans have been stuck in since the Enlightenment, and to be able to say, there is more to this world than what I can see. God is invisible. God is spirit. And so the more that we are able to allow our minds to just go to a place that, yes, it's fictional, but it's a place that is allowing our even our physical brain to rewire around something strange and something other than what we can see and touch and feel. I think that's just essential to the Christian life. And I think that it can open the mind up to God.
I really love that positive case for fantasy. And you're totally right. Like, there are fantasy stories in the Bible. I mean, in Judges 9, there's talking trees that are talking about how can they, choose a new king. I'm like, wait a minute. Did J.R.R. Tolkien rip off his idea of the Ents from Judges 9? Like, is that the original fantasy tale that Tolkien is just derivative of? I mean, and he would probably say so. That. Right. But all throughout the Bible, I mean, there's obviously the true stories, the miraculous things, and they're all kind of like weird in their own way, right? Like, you just look at the way that Jesus healed people. I mean, he spits on mud and puts it on someone's face. Like, there's just so many weird ways that God interacts with the world that he kind of just breaks us out of thinking that things are always going to be the same way. And you're right that, since the Enlightenment, we've had this, I would say, even more than materialistic, it's like a deterministic worldview that, like, everything is determined by mindless physical forces. And okay, yeah, that does explain quite a few things, but not everything, because there's also a human world, and humans are not deterministic. We have very complex things, and I think the more philosophical ways, we're in an open system because God exists. Like, we're not in a closed system that God has no access to, and he can't influence or control or anything.
Yeah, I think my husband would call that compatibilism, actually, that God's sovereignty is compatible. Anyway, we won't get into that, but yeah, there's...
Right, but it's not a mechanistic world that we live in. And honestly, I blame Scooby-Doo for all of this, because every episode of Scooby-Doo is like, oh my gosh, there's a ghost. Oh no, I'm so scared. Oh, wait, it's just some guy that's tricking everyone to thinking that there are ghosts. There's no such thing as ghosts. It's all just people.
Well, my understanding is that that's classic Scooby-Doo. They've now veered totally into everything is an actual real-life creature, at least in the newer cartoons.
Interesting.
So they've gone from one extreme to the other as the culture has gone. And isn't it interesting to see at least one little example of a supernatural-ist mystery cartoon that has gone from one extreme to the other?
Yeah, but I think that shows like that I grew up on the original Scooby-Doo, and there's just been this attitude for a long time of de-enchanting culture, de-enchanting the world. That's why there's kind of a re-enchantment movement happening now, and that's a whole other topic. But I remember learning a long time ago that in the Soviet Union, when they basically outlawed all religion, that what actually really took off was superstition, and that became more and more popular. And then when the Iron Curtain fell, that became sort of this dominant worldview, just this pagan, occult, superstition, horoscopes. Like, there is a void that's going to be filled with something. And nowadays in the West, we see that void being filled by this weird religious devotion people have to certain politics or certain political figures or movements. And as Stephen said, people that say, oh, we don't need fantasy, they end up adopting really weird conspiracy theories about who's actually running the world, and it really shows that you can't take the spiritual component out of man. That is a core part of who we are, and efforts to remove that are just going to backfire.
Yeah, and I think that's what we are seeing right now, is that the younger generations are rejecting that de-enchantment that you're talking about. They are turning to, sometimes they're turning to Christianity. We have more younger people going to church right now. We also have a lot of people turning to like the occult or alternative lifestyles that are, not healthy for them, and just trying to find something spiritual, something that will recognize I have a soul. I'm not just a physical body. There's more to me than just this. In a lot of ways, it's a healthy desire. It's just what are you going to do with that desire? Where are you going to go with it?
Marian, I think that may be, I don't know for sure because it's the devil and you never know what he's thinking or his legions are thinking. But I wonder if that may be why there seems to be a movement afoot to hollow out the fantasy genre, at least from some publishers and some authors, hollow it out from the inside with obsessions over self, and even some of these darker spiritual themes, because that will then take a great tool, a great method for biblical godly reenchantment. Ever since Tolkien was doing it, if not earlier, that will take that tool out of God's hands and then lead back toward the materialism or falsely so-called enchantment that is simply an obsession with the self and with idolatry. The same kinds of things that leads all those people whose testimonies you watched ultimately to destruction. Fortunately, fantasy is a great way to combat that, and we're going to keep talking about that at Lorehaven. Speaking, however, of a world ruled by materialism, perish the thought, but that leads me to sponsor 3, which be me this month, Above the Circle of Earth, my science fiction novel just released back in March and still going strong. Tough little ship with a great crew putting together the origin story of the space mission. Brock and Alicia Rivers were exiled to Mars by religious persecution now 7 years after a lot of hard labor trying to keep their family alive. They're ready to start the first missionary outreach, not on Earth where it is disallowed, but above the circle of Earth in the very territory of the secular humanist regime, the Cause. They're going to have a lot of issues back in their home world and a lot of battles ahead. Hardcover from Enclave Publishing. It is also an audiobook and a digital edition, all available in the links that you'll find in the show notes for this episode 269, or you can go to estephenburnett.com. Also, I'm going to be at the Realm Makers Expo, of course, in the same booth with Lorehaven, and I'm going to be signing copies, talking about science fiction, talking about these amazing stuff. And by the way, Lord willing, I'll have a special edition of this book with some extra swag and maybe a little extra content that folks might enjoy. So that's at the Realm Makers Expo. Marian will be there. Zach will be there. Lorehaven will be there July 18th or 20th in Grand Rapids. Chapter 3, how can we dispel darkness and seek joy? Well, we've already been talking a little bit about this because it's not just about whooping the devil, and it's not even about, as the Christian t-shirt says, Jesus beat the devil with a great big stick. Yes, he did. But as the apostle writes, he did it for the joy that was set before him. And so victory over evil for us is also not just to have beaten the evil, but it is for that time when all evil will be vanished forever. And we can live in the joy, the true pleasures, the fulfillment of the real promises that only Jesus can bring. And I felt that On Magic and Miracles, Marian A. Jacobs' new book, well balances just about everything. I mean, I'm not going to be in full agreement with every author on everything they've ever said, but here I got to the end of the book, Marian, and I'm like, hey, you covered all the bases, like, human responsibility and the fact that demons are still out there fooling people. It's often demons' fault, but it's all our fault at the same time. The spiritual influences, mental health, like it's all here and in such a very clean way. And it's very, very well explored. There was about every time I got to a point in the book where I was like, well, but how about, and then like the next paragraph or page, you were already talking about it. So it's just fun to read too, as I mentioned, just well-structured, head and heart. There's some fun stories in there, but this is serious stuff. Even the business of enchantment is serious stuff. And yet, we don't want to have all respect to Rod Dreher, but I think there's only so much we can do with nonfiction books to say, hey guys, we need some re-enchantment around here. You are pointing to books as well, like even some fantasy novels that we know at Lorehaven that are all about enchantment, that will actually help show you that rather than just talk about it. But fans who focus on magic warnings may miss some other risks in fantasy. And as we draw to a close, I thought we'd talk about those just a little bit. Marian, you've written about some of the other risks, not just fictional magic is going to get you in fantasy, but there's some other things going on there. And I thought it'd be cool to talk about those just really quick. What are some of the real hazards of fantasy, maybe even some fantasy from Christian authors that we might want to be aware of as we're seeking godly enchantment in these stories?
The number one thing that really in any story that you want to always look out for is not necessarily the presence of evil. Is evil in the story? Well, probably. I mean, every story has a problem, but is the evil glorified? the discernment questions hopefully will help us determine what is evil. Then looking at it from a literary standpoint to say, is that evil being glorified? Is it being used by the protagonist without consequences? And I think that's probably the number one thing a lot of people forget to ask when they're looking and reviewing and analyzing a story or trying to decide if it's okay for their kids, is especially parents. Oh gosh, I'm in like some, parenting groups, book recommendation groups for parents on Facebook. And a lot of them are just like, I just need book recommendations for my kids and it can't have any of this stuff in it. Like none of this stuff. It's like a laundry list of everything it cannot have. And it's like really anything bad. And it's not that they don't want it to be glorified. It's just that they don't want their kids to know that it exists at all. Of course, there are age-appropriate ways to introduce children to certain topics, but I just think that can be really, really dangerous way to approach this. It shows a very strong lack of discernment. So I would say, yeah, the making something look good when it isn't. And a lot of the ways that's actually done so subtly. There was actually one story I gave as an example of like, this is not done well. And I had some Christian friends really push back on me and say, no, you're wrong. And I'm like, because I read this book, I enjoyed this book, and therefore, like, I think it's fine. I think that what the author did was fine. I'm like, I think that you are emotionally invested. I think that the way that the author can kind of work the story and the plot and the magic system to make it sound like this has to happen and this is the only way that this can happen can make certain moments sound like, well, this is okay. We've got to take a step back and get a little bit of emotional distance from a story sometimes and say, but is it? One of the biggest ways I've noticed in stories that this happens is through something called, this is the technical word for it, but I'll define it better, consequentialism. And it's very sneaky, but it's the ends justify the means. This is a very dangerous, very unbiblical theme that can often pop up, even in Christian fiction sometimes, because I think people are like, well, this thing has to happen and this goal has to be reached. Therefore, I need to do whatever it takes in order to reach that goal. And sometimes you choose immoral, unethical ends to meet that goal. Sometimes that if that does need to happen because life is messy and characters make poor decisions, there needs to be a way that the readers or the watchers can kind of gauge that to that they're seeing, oh, but maybe there was a consequence for them choosing that to reach their goals through immoral means. Or maybe at some point they acknowledged that wasn't the right thing to do and I could have done it a different way. Just being able to understand consequences, understand if something is being glorified, understand those kind of sneakier things that will slip in, especially when you are emotionally invested in a story and you just kind of want to ride the wave of the story. You don't want to have to step back and say something's wrong here because that will take away from the enjoyment of the moment. But I think it's possible to enjoy a story that you disagree with. And I really want to encourage people to do that. I want people to say, to be able to say, you know what, I enjoyed this story, even though I didn't agree with everything that the author did. And I'm so glad that I read it. And I'm so glad that I watched it. And I was emotionally invested and I enjoyed it and it was entertaining. But at the end of the day, I had just enough emotional distance from it to be able to evaluate my own beliefs against this narrative. We can even empathize with characters in their struggles while also still at the same time being grounded in our own beliefs and being grounded in fiction. And so I personally would say that your empathy can be manipulated, but we should not define empathy as emotional manipulation.
And what you said about consequentialism, I think that's so key to really discerning where magic is being used in a dark way or a good way according to the rules of the story, right? I try to avoid talking about Star Wars, but there was a new Star Wars show where in the trailer, the character says, this isn't about right and wrong, but who has power. And, and honestly, that was the theme in Frozen, right? No right or wrong. For me, I'm free. It's just all Yeah, well,
subverted later on in Frozen.
It is.
Apparently
Yes,
is
it
in
is.
the Frozen 2, as you mentioned, Marian, in the book.
But that's the villain song in a way. It's the
It takes the place of the villain song.
yeah.
Yeah.
All that matters is self and getting what I want and having the control that I desire over the world or other people or my own life. Whereas the good magic, the good fictional magic is I'm using magic to accomplish something noble. I'm defeating the Dark Lord, or I'm righting wrongs, or I'm restoring people to health, and it's sort of mimicking the way that Christ used miracles in the world. It doesn't have to be obviously evil for there to be, bad magic or whatever in a book. I mean, a lot of times it's just this weird self-worship or self-hatred that happens in books. And yeah, the magic is almost like incidental to that. If you took away the magic, these would not be noble people. These would not be heroes. Like the magic doesn't really make them, it just makes them worse in a way. So when you look at the fruit of their lives, that's the more important thing to look at. Like, what is this character trying to accomplish? Who are they serving? Like, who's their master or whatever? What's their goal? It's more the basic questions of story analysis that I think are more important than like figuring out what the magic is doing.
Well, Marian, where can folks follow more about On Magic and Miracles, track your writing, visit your webpage, follow you on the socials as we watch this story, hopefully provide a little dispelling of darkness among its readers and lead to godly reenchantment?
Yeah, I am on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, mostly on Instagram at M.A. Jacobs Writes. Also have a website, majacobs.com, and I have a free middle grade book that is available for download for all of my newsletter subscribers.
We'll have all those links in the show notes, and I appreciate you writing this book. I have said this already. I shan't belabor the point, but we will have that referral link as well for On Magic and Miracles at the show notes for this episode. On Magic and Miracles by Marian A. Jacobs, which is a theological guide to discerning fictional magic. If you're a fantasy fan or you know someone who is, go check it out. And Marian, your dragon's waiting outside.
Bye, guys.
Well, to you, our listener, we want to know, how have you seen people fall into the occult or overcorrecting to get away from the occult? So send us a note to podcast@lorehaven.com or find us on social media. But honestly, the best way to jump into the discussion is join the Lorehaven Guild, our Discord server, where we have a discussion thread for every podcast episode. And we always have some good comments there. So send us a note or find us on Discord.
Yeah, Discord over in the Lorehaven Guild was hopping in the past week thanks to those new emails that I mentioned. So it's increasingly a great place to be to hash out some of these questions from a fan-centered perspective. Very curated, godly Christian community there. Next on Fantastical Truth, today it appears cooler heads have canceled the apocalypse. But were we ever really in that level of danger? This sense of dread feels new. But as C.S. Lewis once wrote, we must practice timeless wisdom when we're living in an atomic age. If we are all going to be destroyed by an atomic bomb, let that bomb, when it comes, find us doing sensible and human things, praying, working, teaching, reading, listening to music, bathing the children, playing tennis, chatting to our friends over a pint and a game of darts. Here and elsewhere, how does Lewis encourage us in the art of living and learning in wartime? And it's war whether or not they're shooting at each other in country X and country Y, because as Marian reminds us, that spiritual battle has always been going on. Yes, there's angels versus demons in the Peretti sense or some other sense, but in the biblical sense primarily. And yet it is also in our choices toward Christ, whom we want to love more than sin, or away from him because we love our sin more than him and may therefore fall prey to demons. That's the choices that we face. So let's make some better ones in light of his saving grace as we continue seeking and finding his fantastical truth.